multiple principals may be colluding. And what we assume an attacker can do is to issue an attack sequence consisting of a sequence of K messages. And the attack sequence can either be an active one, in which case the attacker is playing the role of a resource requester, or it can be a passive attack sequence, in which case he's playing the role of an access mediator or a resource provider. Now, not all attack sequences are feasible because the attack sequence is going to use credentials, and we need to include an assumption that says he doesn't forge credentials, that's not realistic. So we just say that an attack sequence is feasible for M if the messages can be efficiently computed by M. Now, what information is effectively hidden from an adversary? We assume that all he can see is the negotiation. So a given strategy, for a given strategy, two configurations, G and G prime, are indistinguishable using that strategy with M if for every feasible attack sequence, the response induced from G and G prime are the same. Okay, so that's how we formalize the idea that all the attacker can see is your negotiation interaction. What doesn't need to be hidden? Well, an attribute T is acknowledgeable to an attacker M or an adversary M if M possesses attributes that satisfy the acknowledgement policy of T. And releasable credentials are just those that define no unacknowledgeable attributes. So now I can articulate the safety requirement. We call it Credential-Combination Hiding. This is a property of strategies. A strategy is credential-combination hiding safe if for every pair of configurations, G and G prime, where the acknowledgement policies agree, because acknowledgement policies have to be something that you see. And given any adversary M, if the credentials that are releasable to M using G's credentials are the same as those using G primes, then G and G prime have to be indistinguishable by M when you're using that strategy. Okay? Now, we came up with some alternative formulations to see whether it had to be this strong. We tried a couple of weaker formulations that didn't focus on the credentials but just on the attributes. And there was one that looked at hiding combinations of attributes and one that looked at just hiding individual attributes. But in the end, they all turned out to be inadequate for our purposes, which gives us some confidence that we've sort of hit the notion about right. It's probably not stronger than it needs to be. Now, we recently, after the Oakland conference, we submitted a journal version of the paper that it kind of included some of the policy workshop paper and added a new result which says that our safety result is satisfied by essentially the negotiation strategy that we introduced in the Policy 2000 paper. So that's the theorem. Our RT-based strategy is credential combination hiding safe, and we submitted that to TISIC. And the reason that that was kind of interesting and tricky is that RT is an inferential system. So if I want to protect A.R, I may actually have to protect B.R1 as well if we have A.R includes B.R1. So these inferences can be made by an adversary both in a forward direction and in a backward direction. So we had to come up with a kind of closure operation on the acknowledgement policies, which took care of that. So I'm at the end, and what I've told you about is three problems. First of all, providing a language for authorization policy to support collaboration in open systems. This is the RT language. Then techniques for understanding and managing policy. This is the security analysis work. And then finally, trust negotiation techniques and, in particular, requirements for protecting sensitive credential content. The work was funded by DARPA and by the NSF, and we have a medium-sized ITR that just started last year. This is something that Professor Lee and I are cooperating in, along with several others listed here. And one angle that I think is interesting for future work is based on the security policy management stuff. Basically, I'd like to have an assistant that could automatically generate proposals about how to guarantee security requirements are met. So you remember that I had this usage case where an organization could define a bunch of requirements and then entrust to the trusted collection of principals to preserve those requirements. Well, those principals might like a tool to help them do that. If they try to write some policy that turns out to violate the requirements, they'd like to know why and if it's possible to fix things up. And if not, why not? Another thing that's interesting here is insider threat assessment. So we've assumed that the trusted guys aren't going to change things, but suppose that they start making changes that they shouldn't. How much damage could they do to you? Can they compromise all your resources? We need to be able to assess one's exposure to individuals or colluding groups of insiders, and possibly to suggest ways of reducing one's exposure, for example, by introducing separation of duties. And then clearly we need heuristics for the intractable queries that we were talking about. So I think I'll leave it there. I'd like to know if anybody has any questions for me.
This seems to have a lot of things in common with the inference problem in multi-level secure databases. It was a pretty strong area of research maybe 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Except that the security policy there, or the disclosure policy, was very different from what you're looking at. And I'm wondering, have you looked to see whether there's things other than policy negotiation where these models and approaches might be applicable in terms of other confidentiality situations?
I mean, I haven't found any. I've looked. Now, Ninghui, you've been looking at this too with me. Do you have any thoughts about that?
So I think there's certainly some similarities. This kind of correctness requirement for trust negotiation is very much related to information flow security. The definition turns out to be quite similar to definition of non-interference and non-divisibility. But I'm not sure how you can apply this to other areas.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me intuitively, it seems like there ought to be other areas where confidentiality is not absolute, mm-hmm. where this would provide a way to model, and I'm not sure what they are, but I just think it may have wider applicability than.
You're working on this language-based security, right? Mm-hmm. Integrating some of it in that.
Yeah, I mean,